You know how in some sci-fi movies they can just create a perfect copy of someone? Well, have you ever wondered if that could actually be real? Today, we're going to dive deep into a topic that feels like it's jumped right off the screen and into the lab. We're talking about the blueprint of life itself, cloning. So let's just start with a big, mind-bending question. What if you could make an exact copy of a living thing? I'm not talking about a photo or a 3D model, but a living, breathing duplicate. What would that even look like? What would it mean? Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's start at the beginning with a simple, clear definition so we all know what we're talking about when we say the word cloning. When it comes right down to it, cloning is all about the DNA. It's the process of making a new living thing that has the exact same genetic code as another one. And that's the key part right there. It's not a copy-paste of the entire being, memories, personality, the whole shebang. It's a copy of the genetic instructions. Yeah, to really get cloning, you first have to get DNA. The best way to think about it is like this. Imagine there's this incredibly detailed instruction book tucked inside every single one of your cells. This book has the instructions for everything, how to grow, your eye color, literally everything. So cloning then is basically the process of copying that entire instruction book word for word. So if it's just about copying a biological blueprint, that kind of begs the question, right? How is that different from how life is normally created? Well, that leads us perfectly into our next section, comparing what happens out in nature versus what scientists are doing in the lab. Okay, let's break this down. On the one hand, you've got natural reproduction. This is the one we all know, right? It takes two parents, their DNA gets all shuffled together, and bam! The result is a totally unique kid. But then you look at cloning. It starts with just one genetic parent. The DNA isn't mixed, it's copied. The result? A genetically identical offspring. And this is where it gets really interesting when you put them side by side. Just look at the rows for DNA mixture and child identity. With natural reproduction, you always get that DNA mix, which is what guarantees a unique person every time. But with cloning, nope, no mixture at all. That's why the result is genetically identical, with almost no variation. It's a total shift from mixing genes to just copying them. So did scientists just invent copying out of nowhere? Well, not exactly. Nature actually has its own forms of cloning. I mean, identical twins are a perfect example. That's one fertilized egg that splits into two. Or think about growing a new plant from a cutting, or when bacteria just split in two. But the kind of complex animal cloning we're talking about today, that's a whole different ballgame, and it's a purely artificial, lab-driven process. All right, so how on earth do they actually do it? How did we get Dolly the sheep? Let's walk through what we can pretty much call the cloning recipe and see the real science behind making a copy. Every good recipe needs ingredients, right? For cloning, you need three key players. First up, you've got the DNA donor. This is the animal you actually want to clone. Let's call it animal A. Then you need an egg donor who provides a healthy egg cell. And finally, you need a surrogate mother who's going to carry the cloned embryo. Okay, let's follow the steps here. First, scientists grab a regular body cell from donor A, the one they're cloning. At the same time, they get an egg cell from donor B. Now this next part is wild. They carefully suck out the DNA from that egg cell, basically leaving it an empty shell. Then they take the nucleus, which has all the DNA, from donor A's cell and pop it into that empty egg. Think of it like taking the furniture out of one room and putting all new furniture in. A little zap of electricity gets the egg to start dividing, creating an embryo. They put this new embryo into the surrogate mother, and when the baby is born, it's a genetic match to donor A, the original. Now, that recipe might sound pretty straightforward on paper, but here's the reality check. The process is incredibly difficult. And that brings us to the hard truths about clones. This is a very, very imperfect system. The success rate for cloning is just shockingly low. For every one success story like Dolly, there are hundreds, sometimes thousands of failures. Most cloned embryos just stop developing. The few that do survive are often riddled with health problems. A big reason for this is that the DNA comes from an adult cell, which already has wear and tear. The process has to perfectly reset that DNA back to a baby state, and that is profoundly difficult to get right. And this is where we really have to get serious about separating science fact from science fiction. It's time to talk about what cloning absolutely, positively cannot create. Which brings us to the big one. The question everyone really wants to know. After all that science, all that work, do you end up with a perfect 100% duplicate of the original? The answer, scientifically speaking, is simple, direct, and completely unambiguous. In a word, no.
And here's exactly why. Cloning copies the genetic instruction book, sure, but it cannot copy a life. It can't copy memories, which are built from experiences. It can't duplicate a personality, which is shaped by everything from friends to family to random chance. All those unique moments that make you you. There's no way to replicate that just by copying DNA.
This quote really just nails it. The clone will have the same DNA, but life experiences shape the brain, behavior, and beliefs. It's the classic nature versus nurture debate, right? Cloning can copy nature, the blueprint, but it can never copy nurture, which is what actually builds the person. So we've learned that the genetic blueprint, well, it can be copied, even if it's incredibly hard. But that leaves us with one last big question to think about. You can copy the blueprint for the house, but what about the life that's lived inside it?